profile picture there, but if you could let us know where you're calling from and or where you're joining us from tonight, and your pronouns, and hopefully your name is there as well. So you put a little shout out into the chat, let us know you're here. That'd be great. Yeah, many of you are putting yourselves on mute. Thank you, Kay, for joining. Um, so we have a lot of folks popping into the room all at once here. So we will do some intros here in a moment. Just waiting for the room to fill a bit. We have about 100 joining us for this webinar. So folks, as you're joining us, there's a note in the chat. Please let us know who you are, where you're joining us from, and your pronouns, preferred pronouns. We're going to get started here in just a moment. A lot of folks joining the space right now. Welcome, folks. Welcome, everyone. We're starting here momentarily, just waiting for the room to fill a bit. We've got about 100 folks joining us for this call or anticipating. So we're at about 40 at this point. So there's an invitation in the chat. Tell us where you're from, your name, your preferred pronouns. Gonna get start here momentarily. And mute yourself if you could, just to keep the traffic down a little bit. So welcome, everyone. There's many people joining us at this very moment, so we're going to get started here in a moment. Okay, it's quieting down a little bit, but we have quite a few more that anticipated being with us. But I think we have a pretty full agenda for today, so we don't want to delay that too much. But welcome, everyone. Um, okay. So, why don't we get started? Thanks everyone. Welcome. I'm Kathy Manderfield, and I am with Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light, and I'm excited to welcome you here to this webinar, which I will be co-hosting along with a few other folks that you see probably at the top of your screen. Kay Ruth is PAIPL's executive director is generously offering to help us with the Zoom tech support for our time tonight. Jim Nail from Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light and I will be sharing some of the facilitation aspects. And Craig Altaemos is our technical partner from Greener U. So to say a little bit more about your hosts for tonight. Oh, and we have Michael Reed too joining us from Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light as well. Um, so to say a little more about your host for tonight, Greener U is a plan, design, build, decarbonization firm with significant experience supporting houses of worship in their decarbonization journey. And both IPA and Mass IPL share a common origin under the National Interfaith Power and Light Network, where climate action is regarded as a moral and ethical imperative. While both interfaith power and light organizations share the same roots, we bring slightly different regional focuses to the work of animating and resourcing communities in their integration of just care for people and the planet. So we're also aware that there may be other IPLs joining the call tonight. So welcome to you. Please feel free to put a shout out if you're joining us from other IPLs in the country. So also sharing the hour with us are two special guests who have recently engaged in geothermal technology with their faith community. Sharing their stories regarding their experience with us are Kathy Schleier of Wesley Village Church in Wesley, Massachusetts, and Elizabeth Lovett with St. Christopher's Episcopal Church in Gladwin, PA. So we will be hearing more about and from them in a moment. And so this evening, we are bringing our combined experiences together to explore geothermal technology, and we want to thank all of you for joining us. So, before we get started, I want to give you a quick overview of how we're going to spend our time together tonight. So, briefly, Craig from Greener U will give us a brief overview and introduction of the geothermal technology. And next, we'll hear firsthand experiences and stories from Elizabeth and Kathy about their congregation's geothermal projects. And then Jim and I will open up the floor for you as a dedicated question and answer session at the end. And then finally, Jim will close out our time as he shares some encouragement and next step resources for your ongoing discernment and conversation around geothermal. So I hope that gives you a sense of our flow for the evening. And we hope to accomplish all of this in about an hour. And with that, I'm excited to dig in. So happy to hand things over to Craig from Greener U, who will give us a little overview.
Thank you so much, Sister Kathy. It's great to be here with you all. I'm gonna pull up my slides real quick. Can everybody see this okay? Um, very briefly, my my name is Craig Altimos. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Greener U. And again, delighted to be here with you tonight. As Kathy said, we are a plan, design, build company. So we have a planning team, we have an engineering team, and we have a construction management team. So we help institutions, primarily nonprofit institutions, decarbonize their existing buildings, first by planning, understanding the full scope of what decarbonization might look like for a building or a campus, and then designing and actually building the existing systems as we have done and are doing with the two houses of worship here tonight. Here's a selection of our past and present customers, just to give folks a little bit of background on the company. As folks notice, there's a lot of universities on this list. The U in Greener U does stand for university, and that's where we got our start, but we have since expanded to serve a wide variety of other nonprofit and public institutions that have the longer term view of ownership and the mission alignment, where they really care beyond just the bottom line, although that's always obviously very relevant for folks. And we have had the pleasure of working with and serving a number of faith communities over the years. So very briefly on how geothermal works, the technology, and then I'm going to cover 5 main myths about the technology before introducing our 2 main presenters tonight. So at the very high level, geothermal they are heat pumps. They really should be called ground source heat pumps, but most people know them better as geothermal. And basically, a ground source heat pump is a way of moving air that is more appropriate temperature into your building. So air is actually not uniform. So on any very hot day, there's pockets of cold air, and any cold day, there's pockets of warm air. And basically, how an air source heat pump works is that on a very cold day, it will find little pockets of warm air and move them into the building and push out cold air. And on a hot day, we'll do the inverse. We'll move pockets of cold air into the building and move out the warm air from the building on a hot day. But as folks can imagine, it's on a very hot day, you may get 90, 100 degrees. And if you want your building to be 70 degrees, that's only a 30-degree temperature differential. So air conditioning has been very widespread across the country because we can generally do 20 or 30-degree temperature differences. But we've only really seen air source heat pumps widespread in the Northeast because that 70 degrees to maybe 0 degrees that you may have on a very cold day, it's harder to find those pockets of warm air on a really cold day. And so the technology only recently matured to allow air source heat pumps to move the warm air on a very cold day. But the very nice thing about the ground is that it is a very stable, constant temperature, usually between 45 and 55 degrees. And so on a very warm day, it's a lot easier to extract warmth from that 50-degree ground temperature than it is from that 0-degree air temperature. And similarly, on a a very hot day, it's easier to extract coolness from 50-degree ground temperature than from 90-degree air temperature. So it's a very efficient system at moving uh, warmth and coolness into and out of our buildings. Um, and when people think about fossil fuels, the most efficient fossil fuel system cannot be more than 100% efficient, because here you're burning energy and converting it into you're burning fossil fuels, converting it into heat. You can't capture more than 100% of that energy. But because we are not we're not burning energy, we're moving energy. We're not trying to create heat, we're moving heat. Ground source heat pumps can actually be 400% efficient. So they're very, very efficient systems, really the most efficient way really to warm and cool buildings. And they work for both heating and cooling modes. So some of the common myths around geothermal is that it is too expensive, that the ground around here isn't warm enough. You have to be out west where there's a lot of geological activity. You need a lot of open land. You have to rip out your whole existing heating system, and that the incentives for geothermal went away. And so we're going to walk through each of those quickly and then turn over to our presenters. So the first myth is that, again, it's too expensive. And the truth is that on paper, the initial cost is almost always going to be more expensive than other systems. This is a comparison we did for Wellesley Village Church of geothermal compared to a natural gas and air source heat pump hybrid system. Um, but when you look at the actual full costs and you calculate incentives, we actually were able to get them pretty close to parity between the two systems, and Kathy may go more into that. But that's also just looking at that initial cost, right? And when you really want to think of, as particularly as a house of worship, that you're going to be in your building in 50 years, ideally 100 years, you really want to think about the total cost of ownership, which includes the energy cost over time. And geothermal, it costs a lot less to operate than burning fossil fuels or air source heat pumps. The operations and maintenance of the equipment, and again, geothermal has very low operational costs and sorry, maintenance costs, because a lot of the most important equipment is protected by the elements, by being in the ground or being inside the basement. Um, Compliance and penalty exposure. Many municipalities and states are starting to penalize larger buildings for using too much energy. And as that continues to spread, there's a risk of having your own building having to pay penalties if they use too much energy. And then again, the capital cost replacement cycles are similar to that maintenance. If it needs more maintenance, also going to need to be replaced earlier. And then as we'll go further into, incentives and tax credit value are very significant for these projects. And then there's also the comfort, the resilience, and avoiding regret of investing in long-term assets. So the second myth, again, is geography, that geothermal systems only really work well in particular parts of the country. But here in the Northeast, where we're all based out of, 31% of geothermal heat pumps have been installed in this region. So it's absolutely a technology that can work really anywhere there's ground, which most places have ground beneath us, thankfully. Third myth is that it doesn't work in urban areas that you need a lot of land. And again, here is an example of Wellesley Village Church, which you can see is pretty tightly packed in with a couple of roads around it, and a cemetery behind it. And so in this case, really, it's just that parking lot you see is where the wells were located. And so actually, a third of installed geothermal systems are in urban areas at this point. So definitely something you can do in urban environments. And again, here's a picture of the wells for folks there where they are located. And Kathy can tell much more about this as needed. And the fourth is that you have to rip out your entire heating system if you're going to install geothermal. And the reality is that many retrofits can reuse their existing infrastructure. Hot water piping, coils, and ducts can often be reused. And if you can do that, it both lowers construction costs and lowers the disruption to the building occupants. You have to do a lot less work inside the building, but it certainly depends on the building, on the age of the equipment, the condition of the equipment, what the heating and cooling needs are, and whether that equipment is really possible to be utilized here. And that's something that you need to have a firm really come in and help you evaluate. Um, and then the final myth is that the incentives went away. There's a widespread repeal of federal incentives through what was called the Big Beautiful Bill last summer. And a lot of incentives did go away, including prominently for solar, for offshore wind, for wind. and for electric vehicles. But actually, with ground source heat pumps or geothermal, they were left untouched. And so there's a base 30% investment tax credit available through 2032 that starts declining until it is phased out completely at the end of 2034. And nonprofits are able to access this via something called the direct pay mechanism. And if you use domestic content, then you can, so if the equipment that you use is produced, a certain percentage of it is produced within the United States, you can add an extra 10% to that investment tax credit to get 40% of that tax money back. And there's actually also something, if you're part of an energy justice community, you can get yet another 10%. So up to 50% of the project, depending on where you're located, could be fully reimbursable to you from the federal government. Notably, though, you have to model that incentive timing pretty carefully. It's not as simple as an upfront discount. It is, comes after you would file your taxes. And again, nonprofits don't always file taxes, obviously, but they have to go through the same type of process to get that refund, you know, up to a year after you complete the project. So again, you need to be careful about modeling that so you aren't left, waiting for that check before it arrives. Um, but again, the incentives are alive and well again through 2032, so they can really help make the projects that otherwise wouldn't be affordable more affordable. And I think with that, just the bottom line is that geothermal is not the right solution for every single building, but it is for many buildings. And so our recommendation is to start with the building, not necessarily the technology, but start with the building, establish shared goals for your heating and cooling, study the realistic options, make fair comparisons between them, and then make an informed decision. And I think for many institutions and many buildings, geothermal will be the right decision after going through that process. And with that, I will pass it off back to Sister Kathy. Thank you all.
Thank you, Craig, for that overview and for exploring the myths sometimes associated with the geothermal technology. We can get inundated with information at times, and it can be hard to know the fact from the fictions. So I really appreciate you breaking it open with us. Um, and at this time, before we engage in sharing of experiences, I'd like to just take a brief pause to ask you to take a very short poll. I'm going to launch a two-question poll asking you how you heard about this webinar, and the poll should pop up on your screen, and I'll give you about 30 seconds or so to tell us how you heard about this presentation. This helps inform our outreach, and we'll be very grateful if you could let us know. So here goes the poll. Okay. So you should see a pop-up on your screen if you could just make your way to those couple of questions. Shouldn't take you long. Give you another 10, 15 seconds here. We're seeing several coming in. So you might have had to have typed something, so we'll just give you another couple of seconds here. At about 65%. Okay, we're almost there. Yes. Okay. Close this now. So somebody in the chat is asking if this will be available, and yes, we are. We'll be sharing. So, okay, we're gonna end that poll. So at this time, before we engage, I'm sorry, that launch the poll. So thank you for taking the time to share that information with us. And so, as we mentioned briefly earlier, we have two individuals who have accompanied their congregation in a geothermal discernment and journey. And the first to share their experiences will be Kathy Schleier. Welcome, Kathy, and thank you for being with us tonight. So, Kathy Schleier of Wesleyan Village Church is part of an open and affirming congregation of the United Church of Christ in Wellesley, Massachusetts. And she'll be sharing their congregation's discernment and journey. And they've recently completed a 18-well geothermal HVAC project that supplies heating and cooling and replaces an oil-based heating system. So a building system that a building systems project animated by their congregation's deep commitment to caring for creation. And so Kathy served as church moderator and a co-project manager during construction. So thank you, Kathy. Uh, please take it from here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. And I'm delighted to be here with Elizabeth sharing our stories. And yes, so we are a congregation located in Wellesley, Massachusetts, and our church is right in the center of town. And thank you, Craig, for showing that picture of it. It really shows how embedded it is in the community. We do not have a parking lot, so most of our activity happens on Sundays, and so we use the free parking that's all around us. But our space is quite tight. Congregation has been around for several hundred years, but our most recent building has been there 100 years, which has been expanded. So the building takes up all the space except for the driveway around it that is, available to us because we sit on top of a hill. So with that, I think what I'll do is, I've been asked to share a little bit about, who we are, how we discerned this process, what, our needs were, and how we went about the funding. So I've got some slides which I'm going to start right now. And let's see, share. Hang on one second. Uh, why is it? Oh, here we go. Sorry, don't know what the issue was, but now it's working. So here we go. So when we began our process, we started out. This was really a 12-year process, which sounds kind of daunting, but you'll hear as I explain to you that it's not as daunting as it seems in that regard. And some of that 12-year process really helped us actually get to geothermal, which was, a huge win for us. And we a little bit of background first. I think it's easier to talk about our building sort of before I talk about us. So, our building is 55,000 square feet, which is not insignificant. It's pretty large and it encompasses, many additions that were added on over the years. As I mentioned, the sanctuary itself is 100 years old, but the rest of the building was, added at various times. And through that time, our old HVAC system, which was at this point now 30 years old, had included a steam system, which was then converted to hot water radiators and all water system for heating. And we had some cooling, but not as much cooling as we hoped to get. We certainly did not have cooling in our sanctuary. So we had a combination of baseboard radiators running everywhere, and then with some rooftop air units that were providing some of the air conditioning and some of the clean air that was necessary because 55,000 square feet is really the size and acts like a commercial building. What we really had, which was really plaguing us, was this ancient building management system. And so whenever anything went wrong, either the folks who ran the software or the folks who ran the equipment would always sort of point their fingers at the others, and it was very expensive to us. I mean, we were, oil in one year in 2022, we spent over $57,000 in oil bill, and in our contracts with our people who are trying to keep our equipment going, it was really getting quite dire. So we knew that we had to do something, and was going to cost us a lot of money. So of course, we then, excuse me, as I said, went out to gather some quotes. And when we began to gather some quotes, we hang on one second. That went too fast. Sorry. We first wanted to think about, our vision for this was a sort of whole building approach because we had some money that had been given to us over the years that was left over for our greening committee to take and to use. And so they worked towards changing out windows. We added a solar array to our roof. We put insulation in nooks and crannies, and particularly over the sanctuary, and had done a few lighting updates. So we had done a fair amount of stuff to the building and our whole campus, as we call it, but we really hadn't touched the HVAC. And my husband was on the properties committee, and I could hear him in meetings talking about the need to do the HVAC. At that point, I became the moderator and said, all right, well, as sort of part of my 3 year stint where you're learning to be the moderator, 1 year you're the moderator, the next year, and then you're the year after moderator. I said, by the end of my 3 years, we are going to really work on getting a new HVAC system. And so, with that in motion, that's really what we set out to do. And so, fortunately for us, because of this greening committee, they had worked on a geothermal solution, starting 8 years ago, and had enlisted the help of the Trethewey brothers, who are local here. You may hear about them on This Old House. And they came to do a study of our church, and they made some recommendations about geothermal. And immediately, what we came to was A, it's too expensive, and B, the design work and all, it's just way too complicated. So we thought immediately that we were going to, we're getting excited about this idea of air source heat pumps. And right about when we formed a task force to gather the cost for air source heat pumps, we were told by a few vendors, oh, you'll be amazed at how inexpensive it'll be for your building to do air source heat pumps. You won't have oil anymore, and you'll go to natural gas. And with that, they then came to visit our building, and then they said, "Oh, never mind. Actually, it's going to cost you a lot of money because you have to make use of your old ductwork, and we can't use new ductwork, which would make the cost less expensive. And you've got these old radiators that you need to keep using. So when we gathered the cost for the air source heat pumps, lo and behold, that was $2 million. So at that point, it became more interesting to us to think back on the idea of geothermal. And working with Greener U, which was really the most wonderful thing that happened to us, because they really became partners to us and they really wanted to help make geothermal work for us, they were able to give us a quote that, in essence, with the incentives that Craig mentioned, and with some money that we have in Massachusetts, Mass Save, which is a consortium of the energy producers that serve Massachusetts clients. If you are a customer, and we were a natural gas customer because we had a gas oven in our kitchen, then you have access to these incentives. And then based on what you install as part of your changeover, that's how they figure out the credit. So we were eligible for $600,000 in credits through Mass Save, and we were eligible for up to $2 million through the overall cost of this project. And so now all of a sudden we're looking at sort of parity between these two systems. And so to get to the idea of, I'm sorry, this seems to be going too fast. There we go. One more step. We looked at, as Craig mentioned, not just the immediate cost of installation, but we looked at the long range cost of installation. What is it going to cost us 50 years from now, 100 years from now? And that's where it really linked with our vision, because we had the fortunate, as we said, idea that we are going to be around for a very long time. So we wanted to make sure we were doing a solution. As we said, it'd be the most wonderful gift to the next pastor for them not to have to come on board and immediately start thinking about raising money to replace an HVAC system. So the green bars represent the cost of the air source heat pump, and the blue bars represent the long-term costs of the geothermal. And actually what we found is these were older numbers based on earlier, before we finished all of our calculations. And our electricity utility costs actually we're finding is actually lower than this. So our payback is going years and years. So of course, though, we didn't have $4 million lying around, and you have to pay the entire upfront cost before you get the rebates, as Craig mentioned. So we knew we were going to do a capital campaign. And for our capital campaign, as we had decided, it's not such a sexy thing sometimes, an HVAC system. Even when you install the whole thing and it's done, you don't even see it. So we wrapped that around some other needs that we thought would be important to our congregants. And that was, of course, giving to our children and youth ministry. As times get tight and tough in ministries, and sometimes, we do have a youth minister on staff. And, if things really, we lost a lot of parishioners and way down the road, we wouldn't want to let go of a youth minister. And so if we have an endowment for that, that would be a wonderful thing to create. So that's what we did, as well as thinking about bolstering our own endowments and then also working as our service component for this to give money to Village Table, which is an organization that is sort of started at our church but is now community wide that helps provide meals throughout the greater Boston area. So that was the idea for our campaign. But then the question is, how are we going to present that to, the congregants? And as we are congregational, so we vote on every decision, particularly financial decisions, we had to convince, several hundred people and then take a vote that this is a worthwhile endeavor. So we had begun messaging early on about the need to replace our HVAC system, and we had begun to, tell people that, here it's coming, this campaign is going to start. And so we got going, and of course, in 2024, also something else was happening, and that was the presidential election, as Craig alluded to. So we decided we put together that information that I shared with you, and Greener, you helped us with that messaging, and they helped come to meetings. That was actually huge. We had Rob Durning come and explain geothermal, so it wasn't folks like myself trying to explain how it works. We had the experts there. And that was wonderful to really have that assistance of both some help with graphics and creating our uh, PowerPoint presentations, as well as having his access to him for sharing with the congregation. So we came to several meetings after church explaining things, and then it came time for the vote. And it was really through an idea that our vision always was, as we said, sort of to look further and deeper. And, the ones who stood up and were the most vocal actually were, the young adults. The young adults said, this is really important to us. And we really think this is important to the town. It's important to the community. Massachusetts is sort of known for, its environmental concerns, and the town was trying to get to certain goals. So if we could get off oil and off gas, that would be even better. But we did want to say to people that no solution was a bad solution. Anything was better than the oil that we had. So each of these was, a viable alternative. But then when it came down to the vote, we were pleasantly surprised that 85% of the people voted for geothermal. And then we drilled our first well in December of 2024, purposely to begin construction and have a start date in case anything changed, although we weren't really worried about the rebates going away from the federal government, the incentives. But we did want to make sure we had that start date when we knew the bulk of the construction would be in 2025. So, hang on one second. So, one of the things I just want to stop for 1 second, and I've only got like a couple more slides. One of the things that I wanted to say is what made it work for us is we did have to spend some upfront money. And that initial research that I told you that had been done 8, 10 years before us, well, we needed to upgrade that research. So we had to spend the money to get closer to the actual design and know what it would really cost us, because the key element to this is we wanted a fixed price contract. We had done a major renovation in the church 22 years ago, and memories are long, and that renovation didn't go so well, and there were lots of additions after the fact, and change orders, and remortgaging, etc. So we wanted to make sure that that wasn't repeated. So the fixed contract price was critical to us, and that helped remove the risk and helped make it easier for the congregants to vote for a number that they knew wouldn't change, as well as, of course, the incentive payments, and then working closely with the congregation. So here's a quick shot of the again, sort of what Craig showed you a bit. How and where does 18 wells go in a property that's on a hill with a cemetery immediately adjacent and no parking? Well, it's easy. It goes under the parking lot, under the driveway. Excuse me, under the driveway. So all of our wells are in the driveway, and as it turned out, our driveway, a lot of it needed to be replaced anyway, so that gets wrapped into the cost of the project, and we get 40% of that back as well. So that's a little bit, tiny bit of the technical piece of it. So, what were some of our lessons learned? And I think you can sort of read these yourself. But one of the reasons that we feel that Greener U was so important to us as our contractor was they handled not only the sort of the on-site day-to-days, managing the vendors, uh, uh, all of that, but they also were so fluent with negotiating. So they negotiated with Mass Save for us, and they kept all the paperwork that was necessary and needed to file the federal tax forms that we have actually just submitted recently. So that was huge for that. We did use a campaign consultant. I mean, we do have a stewardship committee that raises our annual operating costs, but it wouldn't have been really fair for them to layer on top of that, asking in short order and short notice to try to help us come up with, calling on people to get $4 million and to get it fairly quickly because we wanted to start right away. So we wrapped that cost of the consultant into the program. We did obviously wrap in some extra money for extras, which was good because when we pulled up our 25-year-old roof to put down new air handlers, we had to do some roof work, so we had that built in. And as I mentioned, we had to invest about 180,000 in design costs to not only do the actual design for the number of wells, which was a good thing because it actually came back to tell us we didn't need quite as many as we thought we needed, but it also included the cost of that first test well, which then gave us the information that we needed to know exactly how many wells we needed. We did do weekly meetings before, during, and after, and the after piece is really key because it has taken us this full year. Greener U sort of warranties the project for a year, and we went online in November of 2025, a little bit later. We hope to be there right at the start of the heating season, but the drillers started late. Everything got pushed back a little bit. And as you cycle through these different times of the year, you learn different things about your system. So this last item about needing to groom, that's really true. You need to spend, the all this equipment has to flow together. And so there were, one or two items that were defective that had to be replaced by the manufacturers. There were changes to the main thing is we had a lot of old broken equipment in our old system that we didn't know until we got the new system going. And it told us which valves weren't working, which radiator valves were broken, which variable air volume pieces were not working. And so unfortunately, if we could have started that part earlier, we would have, had a better idea. So anyway, I'm just going to stop there. I do have a few more bonus slides at the very, very end if you want to see something about some of the technical pieces, but I'm going to let it go because I think my 15 minutes are up. But just want to end on the note that we did do a lot of community outreach. As I mentioned, we are centered right there in town, and we put up some large signs actually that Greener U helped us build saying sorry for the noise because the drills were really loud and they went on for 6 weeks every day, like 9 to 5. So we then worked with our town sustainability director, and we have done forums on geothermal, and we've invited folks from the town as well as business and business
The
business
church in
development.
Weston, Massachusetts.
Weston?
Yeah, it's
Pardon?
Illinois.
Pardon? Wellesley, Mass. We're in Wellesley, Massachusetts. Yes. So with that, I'll end. I'll stop sharing, and
Kathy, before you stop, perhaps you want to advance your slides just so that they will be engaged on the recording,
ah,
and then people can pause on them, and
okay.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah. All right. So
And
this is showing our wonderful new building management system, which is unbelievably fabulous because it shows you exactly what is happening in every space as well as. So here's our floor plan. We can now look room by room and we can set temperatures room by room. And, we had one pastor who was from Lebanon and he wanted the temperature in his room to be 85 degrees and others didn't want 85 degrees. So you can adjust for that kind of thing. The other fancy thing that this is just one last slide that'll show you is that we can do heating and cooling at the same time. The north side of the building is cold, the south side is hot. The system just takes the warm air from one side and the cool air, water from the other side and moves it around. So it's really, it's amazing. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing.
Great. Thank you, Kathy, for sharing a bit of your journey with geothermal with us. We can really learn a great deal from others' experiences. So we are really, really grateful. So
I do see
the
one question. Do you want me to, did you need to raise the money for the full? Yes. So just 2 seconds. I think Elizabeth might say the same thing. We did need to raise all the money in advance to pay our bills to Greener U because the system cost $4.5 million. We were fortunate with the gifts that came in through our campaign that we raised over between two and 2.5 million or so with money that came in fairly quickly, which enabled us then we borrowed from ourselves. We had planned, we had some short-term money in our in reserves is what we call them, which is sort of the equivalent of an endowment. And so we were going to borrow from ourselves at the rate of which there's a government, use the government rate to borrow from yourself and pay yourself back. If we weren't going to sell anything that we owned that was an asset, like investments. So if we needed to go beyond that, we would have borrowed from a bank outside at the prevailing rate, which would have been expensive. It would have been over 6 or 7%. But fortunately for us, between the gifts that came in, as the money came in, we were paying it out. And because that little bit of a delay in not going online in November, that actually allowed for our monies to come in. So we did not have to do any outside borrowing. And we are paying ourselves back. We've actually started paying ourselves back already.
So thank you, Kathy, for that. There are a few questions, I think, in the chat, and Jim is collecting those, and we'll be returning to those. So thank you for that, Kathy. And so this is Elizabeth. Love it. And Elizabeth is our next person to share. And she is an architect who serves on the vestry of St. Christopher's Episcopal Church, a vibrant Christian community in Gladwin, PA, with a mission to lift people up. And as a congregation, they strive to use their church property to model environmental stewardship and invest in resilient long-term resources for use in their local community. Elizabeth serves as the property chair on the vestry at a time when infrastructure upgrades became necessary. So, by combining the various talents and efforts of other vestry members, and their engaged parishioners, St. Christopher's has forged an exciting path forward for engineering, financing, and constructing a new geothermal heat pump system. So, Elizabeth, please.
Hi. I'll just start by saying that in many ways, our project sort of drafted off the Wellesley project, and I plan on doing the exact same thing with this presentation. So I'll do my best here, but give me a moment to share here. All right. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So this is St. Christopher's. It's a wonderful church. It's a small church. We're Episcopal, and we're located in Gladwin, PA. So for the Northeast contingent here, that's a suburb of Philadelphia, just to the west of Philly. So Eastern PA. Our grounds, we're a little bit different from Wellesley Church in that our grounds we have a large property with a lot of open grassy acres. And it's very much a part of our village community. We have the trees serve as an arboretum. We have a lot of outside groups like AA and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts that meet in our facilities. It's very popular with dog walkers. We've done outdoor yoga. We have a preschool. Our playground is technically for that preschool, but it's used by the general public. So it's a really important part of the community, and the community kind of comes through us, and I think that's a big part of our identity. So the facilities and grounds are really important to us. Um, anyway, so that's us here. We're an Episcopal church, and we're part of the Episcopal Diocese of Pennsylvania, which is actually just the eastern side of the state. And we're a mostly self-organized, self-disorganized little group. We have a vestry, So if you're from a sort of more Protestant group, a vestry sort of acts like a board of directors. We have a fearless leader. Right now, that person is Peg Schofield, and she's pictured in the hat here, and she's wonderful.
What
Um,
the fuck happened to you?
and that's our that role kind of rotates through through the parishioners uh, based on a few things. So within that vestry, I serve as the property chair. I inherited the role from someone who was far more capable than me and was more experienced in managing all these buildings about 5 years ago, and I've kind of been faking it ever since. The physical property here, again, is a team effort. We do have one staff member who both cleans and cares for the property, which is a position we call a sexton. However, so much of it, like the gardening and the day-to-day maintenance of structures, is really cared for our parishioners who simply take initiative to fix something or to weed something or pick something up rather than email someone like me. So it's really remarkable in that way how over such a long period of time this property has been cared for. Um, and it's very important to people. But just to orient everyone, our church is laid out very differently from the Wellesley Church. We are not compact. We're essentially a courtyard building. If I move my mouse, can you see it? Um, so this is our sanctuary, kind of to the left here. And then we have a level of offices, and then below that, kind of like the ground sort of slopes, is a level of classrooms. And then we have our parish hall, which is sort of our main meeting space outside of the sanctuary. And then we have a kind of a kitchen, a library, and then this old sort of building is a little preschool, which we call the day school. And everything is sort of organized around a courtyard and this kind of low hallway that does not have room for ductwork in its ceilings. Um, so the way that our current utilities work is that there's a boiler room with gas furnaces in the bottom of this building that serves radiators here and then kind of goes underneath this breezeway and serves through a sort of air system that goes through the crawl space of the sanctuary. So that's how we get heat there. And then we do have air conditioning, but only in this portion of the building right now. And it's served by just two units that sit kind of under this tree. Um, and then there's another boiler, a second boiler room down here that is also gas boilers that sort of feeds the rest of this sort of wings of the space. So that's what we're working with. We're working with a gas system and then very sort of limited air conditioning in the summer. And of course, this is Pennsylvania, so increasingly it's been getting very hot in the seasons that our day school is there. And so it had been limiting to us in terms of the programming that we could do, the schools, how we could use the building, groups that wanted to meet here. Um, the church really goes, I don't want to say it goes dormant in the summer, but there's a big drop off in participation in the church in the programs that we run. And part of that's just the sort of cadence of our area, but it's also a result of the fact that we don't have air conditioning. Um, so that was part of our sort of pipe dream. Okay, so we turned 75 last year as a congregation and as a church. And so on the occasion of our 75th birthday, our current rector, our leader, said that, she wanted to launch a capital campaign, and we were all very excited about this. And the campaign had three primary purposes. One was physical improvements to our property. We really went back and reviewed the history of the founding of our church, and were taken aback by just the level of sacrifice and also faith that was required to build our buildings and to start our congregation. So there was a lot of inspiration there. The second is outreach, and then the third was to add to our endowment for similar reasons that Kathy articulated for their church. So we've raised about $3.5 million to date, and we have made $100,000 gift to the St. James welcome table, which sounded very similar to your village table, Kathy. It's a wonderful organization that I wish I had time to tell you about, but it's wonderful. That's kind of where we're at. There was a committee to do the capital campaign, and I wasn't a part of that, but they did a great job. Um, so when it came time to begin to talk about, well, what's the inspirational physical project that we're going to use for our capital campaign, they looked at me and I said, well, how about HVAC? And I could just sort of feel the room deflate a little bit. It wasn't that exciting project, but I think it was certainly a very necessary one. We had these sort of older systems that certainly needed an upgrade. Again, there was beginning to be this real desire for air conditioning, and our electrical system, which was sort of part of this project, was really threadbare. And so it was flagged as one of the large projects that we would take on as part of it. Um, so this is a picture of our local fire department who's very close by and also very connected to the church, but also was here on a weekly basis because our furnaces and blowers were constantly tripping our gas sensors, and it was sort of a running joke that God was trying to work in the hearts of these firemen because they kept bringing them to this church every Sunday for gas. Um, Okay, so as we kind of got into this, we were confronted with how large this project was going to be. I think we had a similar moment to the Wellesley Church where we thought it was going to be several hundred thousands of dollars, and then it was even the sort of baseline option to do what we wanted was going to be in the millions. And so we started to ask ourselves, are we going to plan for 5 or 10 years, or are we going to plan for 20 to 100 years? And of course, everybody, given if all things were equal, everybody would want to plan for that 20 to 100 years. So it wasn't really a question of values. It was a question of was it possible? And, in the context of our 75th birthday, we were really inspired to think long term. And so we had a kind of a 75-year timeline looking forward, um, to kind of use to evaluate our decisions. Um, so that's kind of the impetus of all of this. So this is how it started. This is our bishop. We had our test well blessed, which is a little little I don't know how to describe it. It's not an exciting thing to bless a little pipe in the ground, but anyway. And then this is how it's going. This is a photo of from yesterday, actually. We started to tear up our parking lot. So that's where we are in the process. We are tearing up our parking lot this week with the hopes of drilling wells in the up, in the upcoming weeks, which is exciting. Um, so again, similar, we didn't have a 12-year timeline. I would argue that I think we would say we're probably at a 2 or 3 year timeline. And this is kind of where we're at, although I guess our dot should move down a little bit. But so we started this capital campaign in the summer of 2024, and that's when we began to evaluate funding priorities, and the heating and cooling became um, the biggest thing to digest there. One thing that I think is important, and I'll kind of zoom into it here, and I would recommend to other institutions that are trying to launch something so that you have a firm basis on which to make decisions, is that we hired an engineering firm to evaluate what we had. With a building that had been cared for by so many hands, um, there's not necessarily a common understanding of the condition of things and of the future lifespan of things. For one person, something never works. We should just replace it. And for another person, it's like, oh no, it does work. You just have to kind of jiggle it a little bit, and then it's up and going again. And so just to establish sort of a common basis of what do we have, what is the lifespan of it, and that's really served us as a good basis for decision making. And so that we did in the fall of 24. And I would say I would personally say that that was money well spent. The second sort of step, well, actually, before I get there, um, we had them evaluate what we had to, say what is the lifespan of our current systems, and then secondly, we asked them to take a look at what our options were. We want to add air conditioning and we need heat. And we didn't necessarily say, give us the most sustainable solution. We really just wanted common sense solutions to our future problems and existing problems. And so they came up with sort of four options, really three options that were very similar, which were BRF, air sourced heat pumps, and then geothermal was on the far right side. And this was, we looked at this chart for a very long time and discussed it at length. And in the end, you can kind of see the two that they had recommended. Uh, Very quickly, we sort of limited it to option one, which would be air source heat pumps. And then geothermal was still on the table, but we didn't really have a sense that that would be a feasible thing. It didn't feel like a real option just because of the expense and the timing of it. When we were kind of doing the discussions of this was when the big, beautiful bill was going through its writing and back and forth between the different parts of, you know, the Senate and the Congress, and things were bouncing forth, and we were sort of watching that, but really without much optimism about it. And we didn't really understand fully how the credits work. We'd been told things, but we hadn't really dived into the language yet. Um, and so, based on those things, we asked for cost estimates, and I think this is really when it hit home to us the scale of the project that we were taking on. And so I'll be honest, I'm not sure this is the latest final cost estimate we had. It all blends together in my mind. But at some point, the air sourced heat pumps were starting to come in, at 2.6, and the geothermal was looking, 3.7. And so they were not, I think again, it's the similarities to Wellesley Church are great. They're both very big numbers, and if the federal credits turned out to be real for us, those numbers start to become much more competitive with each other. But it's still a very difficult thing to go into a meeting and say those big numbers. Or it was for me personally. Um, So then we did a round of contractor bids. So we took our very schematic design from the AKF earlier step two report and went out and had a project management team try to bid those out. This step I don't think was as successful just because we had such schematic level designs that it was hard to get really high confidence in the numbers. We did this step in part because this was there was just a lot of turbulence in the construction industry, especially in our area. But with the tariffs and different labor things that were happening, we just weren't sure how well our cost estimating was going to play out in reality. We just wanted more confidence in those numbers. Um, but again, I'm not sure how useful that was in the end, but maybe it was. But during that time, the big beautiful bill did pass, and the geothermal tax credits were intact. And I think that's when we really started to get serious. And I started, Googling, surely someone else has done this. We can't be the only church. If it makes sense for us, either I'm crazy or we're crazy, or other people are doing this. And that's when we found the Wellesley Church. We started talking to Kathy and Kathy's husband, who was running property, and really kind of were able to connect with them and get confidence. At the time, I remember thinking, if they can do it, we can do it. And then later, as we went further down, I found out that, Mark's a nuclear scientist and that this team was just an incredibly capable team. And I really started to doubt us. But we were in it by then. So there we go. And then, yeah, then selecting the team for us, we really sort of copied the script from the Wellesley Church. Um, with the exception that we had Greener U come in much later and help us really as a general contractor. We had already spoken with a lot of contractors around us, and we just didn't have the in-house capability, the knowledge to understand and interpret the bids we were getting. That was sort of our experience in the previous step. So, anyway, that's a little bit of our process. You can see we are upgrading our electrical. We had single phase electrical, and now we're getting three phase. We thought we were going to have to pay for most of that, but it turned out our utility company um, is doing that on our behalf. And I would say if you're doubting, if you have doubts in your faith, I can show you an electrical panel box that will make you believe in miracles. So for us, this was a big part of the project. So that's on the way. And then, yeah, we drilled our test well, which was very exciting, and we were able to fine-tune the design. We have 21 wells, so more wells than Wellesley, but less deep. We're at 650. And then our distribution system is pretty different from theirs, just because we're such a wrangly building. We're not compact at all. And yeah, so I would just say this is our dumpster, which arrived on site last week. But we're certainly excited. We're a little anxious. I think a healthy anxiety kind of running through us. Yeah, I would just say that if I were to make a takeaway, it's that the geothermal, it might be the right solution for your church. But more importantly, I would say that I would encourage you that if you have a big project that needs to be done, which I think for a lot of institutions on the East Coast, just based on when we developed our institutions, a lot of building in the 50s and 60s, that makes us a sort of hinge in leadership. So if we want our institutions and their physical properties to not be a huge burden to, in 30 years, people who are in our positions now, then we have to kind of bite the bullet and do those big projects. And it's just, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? You just get in there and do it. And so I would encourage that. Maybe it's geothermal, but maybe it's other investments.
Yeah. Kathy, wow, thank you. I mean, Elizabeth, thank you. Wow, that's really grateful for the unique experiences that you are having and that your congregation is well underway. And we send you lots of good energy and blessings on the journey as it unfolds. And just really grateful for both you and Kathy for sharing your time with us. When we initiated the timeline for our sharing today, we knew that 1 hour would be very intense. So we have gone over the hour, but I do think the opportunity to ask some questions of Kathy and Elizabeth are what many of you are hoping for and are waiting for. So we are going to continue on here to try to give at least 10 to 15 minutes for that. So we'll see where what kind of interest we have in that. And but we also know that many of you took the time and are having to engage in other things. So I'm gonna invite Jim here. He's gonna help me out in terms of a process here. So what we thought we would do is invite those of you who would have a question. I know many of you have put some into the chat already, and Jim has been collecting and reviewing those. And if you want to ask your question verbally, we'll go back and forth. So I think if you're interested in verbally speaking your question, if you could just raise your hand, use the raised hand feature, then we'll go from the raised hands in the room to the chat. And I think because we've already started a bit, why don't we start with Jim in terms of a chat question? I know
Yeah,
Kathy
there's
answered one already, so go
yeah,
ahead.
there's actually not a lot in the chat. So
Okay.
definitely welcome all questions. So raise your hand or start putting them in the chat because I know there's a lot of information here, and I'm sure a lot of it's kind of swimming around in people's minds. One thing that came up was, both the Wellesley Church at 55,000 square feet and Elizabeth, your church is 20,000 plus square feet. So both pretty big buildings. And Craig, maybe this is to you. It's like how good a fit is geothermal for a smaller building? I know in my experience at Mass IPL, kind of the average house of worship building in a suburban setting anyway is more like 10,000, 15,000 square feet. So a little
Yeah,
bigger than a big house, but smaller than some of these examples we've seen tonight.
yeah, it's a great question, Jim. And I think the short version is that you can really do these across a wide variety of building sizes. So there are many single family homes that are powered by geothermal, or that are, excuse me, are heated by geothermal. And so, unfortunately, those are not eligible for the tax credit. If they buy the system, that the residential tax credit was phased out. But the commercial tax credit for institutions like houses of worship, even if they're the size of a single family home, is still in play, and they can benefit from those. And actually, the single family homes, there's a workaround in that if they work with a private company that would own the system and they would lease that system from the private company, then they would be able to benefit
Mm.
from the tax credit. But in answer to your question, technologically, it absolutely can scale down, pretty dramatically. Obviously, you just have a lot fewer wells at that point for the system. But even one well is sufficient for a smaller building, and it's still practical um, technological solution.
Right.
Thanks, Craig. Any other questions from the room? Anybody want to raise your hand here to speak your question out loud? We'll come back to the chat. Richard, I see your hand up there.
I
Go for it.
I have a question for Craig. Has he dealt with standing column wells versus an array? I mean, I'm from Concord, Mass, and we've actually drilled a test well, but and then we thought the rebates went away, and we sort of said, well, I guess we're gonna have to, we're going towards air source, but then now we're saying, well, no, there's the 30% is still there after the big better bill, whatever. And so we're reconsidering geothermal, but we were looking at a standing column well where the water is recycled within the well as a simpler, more reliable alternative to a whole array of short, lower, not so deep wells. Do you have any opinion on those?
I'm sure that our engineers do. Unfortunately, that is not my background. So
Okay.
I'm gonna ask if Richard, if you can drop your email in the chat, or if I can, I'll drop mine um, here as well. And would love to have a follow-up conversation with some of our in-house technical experts.
Well,
Unfortunately, that's not my.
You know Brad Hubbard Nelson, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. He's determined to get you involved in our project. So
Great. Well, we'd love to be in touch with them.
So
Yeah.
Kathy or Elizabeth, did either of that come up for you? The what Richard was sharing in terms of that type of technology, did that would get presented for either you or in your projects? Okay.
No, there is one question here I see about how did they deal with air movement and distribution in the large sanctuary space, and we went from seven air handling units to two with this project, but our air handling units handle not only the fresh air that's needed, but also moving the warm air or cool air around the spaces. We have CO detectors everywhere, so the system is constantly monitoring how many people are in any given space, and if there's a need for more fresh air, it will just automatically make that adjustment. One of the things I will say that's really pretty remarkable about the system is that now what you do is you specify what you put in a sort of a set schedule. A room is occupied or unoccupied. The hours that it's occupied, the system software will turn on the heating or cooling so that it's ready at the occupied hour. So it's doing a lot of work in the background. And obviously, you can make changes to that because not all schedules are fixed. But the building management software is really quite remarkable in what it can do.
Okay. So thank you, Kathy, for picking up that question from the chat. I see Alan, you have your hand raised there if you want to ask your question.
I do, yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you for the presentation. It's extremely helpful. I guess my question for Kathy and Elizabeth is just around both of your projects, and I know, Elizabeth, you're still kind of going through it, but I wonder if either of you can speak to anything that you wish you had known kind of going in, or anything that was maybe a surprise or a gotcha or something just to be aware of for those of us following in your footsteps, as it were, and just thinking about how we might do this for our own organizations, what you might suggest we look for or pay close attention to as we get started.
Well, I'll say the most important thing is your partner. And I mean, we are on a Greener You event, but I have to say that that really was for us everything, because they were both they were a partner in this work, and they managed there were so many elements to the messaging, to the pre-construction, to the construction, to all the different vendors that need to come in, and all the things, all the surprises that you don't really expect, that's stuff that's ancillary that comes up, like weird, and whatever your idiosyncrasies are about your plant or your building, and then they work with you to kind of massage it and work through it. So having and then that year that they have given us to be on site with us to make sure that it's all going to work well, I mean, that was a game changer, because there was something like in the beginning, every week there was something different that went on. And most of it, as we said, it was all about our old equipment and the broken stuff that we didn't know that was in place. And so we couldn't get the heat through because the valve wasn't working or something. But there was a lot of that to go through. So that really was, yeah, you've got to really choose carefully as to who your project manager is.
I
Elizabeth,
would,
did you? Yeah.
I'd say, I mean, we may have our surprises in front of us because we started digging yesterday. But from a process perspective, um, I would say one positive thing that was something I wouldn't have expected as a result of doing a project of this size is just the degree to which you learn more about your own parish or your own colleagues in the church. And you really see a different set of strengths from the people that you work with. You know people in a context of church and fellowship and who's going to provide coffee hour and things like that. And I think churches can get really bogged down in sort of small scale either excitement or squabbles, but when you have a big project like this, you find out like really it highlights the strengths of your team. So it's the ultimate team building exercise, the geothermal project. So I don't know if that's a reason to do it, but I think that's been a positive surprise for us.
Very well said. I agree with that totally.
Thank you both.
I
So,
think we
Jim,
actually
is there?
we,
Yeah,
we
another
actually have
question.
a question in the chat, or I'm going to sort of paraphrase things to build on this question about the partner and how important the partner is. Um, because in addition to Greener You, I believe Craig, you act as general contractor and then you subcontract things like drilling and the HVAC and some of those things. And so there's these questions about what does do the folks at the institution need to know about things like drilling and things about these other partners, and even down to the level of, you know, Mitsubishi versus Daikin versus,
Train.
Train versus, all the different brands of equipment out there. And at what level do the folks at the House of Worship um, need to understand all of that? And how do you help them be comfortable with the recommendations that you're making?
So I actually invite Elizabeth and Kathy to answer this first in terms of because I actually, again, transparently, I was not part of really the implementation of either of these projects, and so I'd love for them to share how involved they were in those sorts of decisions, how much we, because I know we have a very transparent process where we show the bids, we show the prices, we show the equipment that we're looking at. But yeah, yeah. Anyway, I'd invite both of you or either of you to jump in on that first.
Well, if I
Oh,
think if I could piggyback on what Elizabeth said, because just to follow up what she said, it's really true. You don't really know. I didn't know anything about HVAC systems. My background's in a nonprofit that had nothing to do with this, but you learn, and folks will volunteer for elements that, all of a sudden it comes up that someone knows something a little bit about heating and cooling or this and that. We were very fortunate that Mark Lensley, who was my co-partner in this, had a technical background, but it was more that he had time. You really need people who have time, and I'll put in the chat the a link to our church where we have all the videos that he took, sort of regular and often videos that he was sharing with our congregation of what was going on, and messages that were then, short write-ups that he was doing that went into our weekly e-news. And those kinds of things were so important to, keeping everybody informed and not question, particularly as there were some delays and there were some things that took longer. And why would they come in one Sunday and there's no heat? Why is there no heat? It all that could easily be readily explained, and people didn't mind they had to put their coat on, for instance, if the heat wasn't on, we thought it would be in October. They just brought their coats and wore their coat in church. So it went from not only the project people, but all the way to all of our community were invested in this.
I would say I can't agree more about the time thing. I came in as an architect having a general knowledge of this, and I would describe it as when I hear something, I could kind of know that that sounded expensive or it didn't, without the number. Um, but we had other members of our team that had a lot more time than I did. And now they far surpass me in understanding what's going on, and they've read the drawings in more detail. And our sexton, who is again like our kind of our building property manager, is probably a more normal way to say that job. Just totally enthusiastic about the project and is running it more or less with our admin staff. And then, but I'll say that you definitely need a partner. In our case, it, of course, was Greener You, who has infinite patience to explain it. Um, because it's not an intuitive thing, HVAC generally, much less geothermal. And so just someone who will take the time is important. And then having people who are genuinely interested. I think it's two skill sets. One is understanding it, and another is being able to communicate it. Often the people who really understand these technical things, it's really, they can get into there's a balance, right, between explaining all the idiosyncrasies of these systems and also not losing the audience in trying to explain to them how exciting this thing that they won't ever see is. And that we're hoping that when they walk in, the heat will feel the same. We've spent a lot of money for it to feel the same. Um, but like, yeah, obviously. So I would say
I will
that
say,
that's
oh,
important.
I would just very quickly say, one, to your question about Dandelion. So we did invite Dandelion to bid on the drilling for at least St. Christopher's, I believe, possibly for Wellesley Village Church as well. Um, and we invited a number of different drillers to bid. But I think like one thing to keep in mind is I would say as you're talking to drilling companies is that the drilling is really just half of the picture, right? The other half is what the inside of the building components are. And I think a lot of drillers are much more confident and comfortable with that exterior part than the interior part. And I think when people think about geothermal, they really think about that exterior part. But again, the interior mechanical equipment is if you don't have that done well, it's not going to be a successful project, and it can very easily oversize the well systems. And I think in some ways the drilling companies have an incentive to oversize the systems. They get paid more if they get to drill more wells, and so you really make sure that you have a good partner who's able to help you think through the inside components. I also do see my colleague Eric Greenebaum from Greener, who's also not an engineer, but has some a good head on his shoulders. I don't know if you want to respond to that all, Eric, or jump in here.
Um, Thanks, Greg. I mean, I think it's been a really good conversation. I don't have tons to add, but I do think that a key thing is, you know, especially with drillers getting, competition going between them and for all the sub trades and making sure that you're getting the best price and right sizing the system is critical. I know Wellesley Village Church did a lot of energy efficiency and envelope work up front. So you don't want to oversize the system. You want to drill as few wells as possible and have, keep your internal distribution equipment, as modest as you can be to serve the purpose. So really, I think a lot about it is doing that upfront work to make sure that you're doing, doing the efficiency and the insulation and the air sealing, and then thinking about how do we look at the different systems, and then comparing different. Every institution has a different sort of mindset, and some are like we have a couple of churches right now that are like we only want to look at geothermal. That's it. We don't want to look at anything else. We've had others. Wellesley Village Church looked at a hybrid air source system. We've got one that we're working with right now. On Beacon Hill in Boston that wanted to look at the continue on their gas system as sort of business as usual. And they knew that there were members of their board of trustees who were going to ask that, like, what would it cost if we just stick with our current system versus air source versus geothermal? So, and each institution has its own needs and goals. And I think doing that upfront work as both houses of worship on this call have done is really key. So, yeah, I think it's been a great conversation. I appreciate everything and all the questions as well.
Just one final comment. If you are in Massachusetts and you plan to get incentive money from Mass Save, that is quite the process. And Greener, you helped us with it because it was constant back and forth between the engineers at Mass Save and the engineers who were designing our project to make sure we weren't oversizing because they also don't want to give back more incentive than they need to or want to. So the engineering piece was critical.
So I think on that note, there are, we can acknowledge that as we get into this, more questions and more questions will emerge, and we need to continue digging into it and to explore this. And I think we would encourage you to do just that. Jim is going to share with you a little bit of just where to go from here or how to think about continuing this conversation. Fortunately, we've surpassed our time for tonight. So, in to honor your own commitments and your own realities, we're going to need to wrap it up for tonight. But Jim, if you could sort of wrap us up here, and again, very grateful to Kathy and Elizabeth and to each of you for being here today, for Craig and for the IPL realities. Thank you for your engagement tonight. It's been really informative. So, Jim, why don't
Yeah.
you sort of wind us up here?
Sure thing, sure thing. I'll tell you, I'm going to take an exception to one thing that both Kathy and Elizabeth said, that HVAC is not exciting and it doesn't get exciting to people. Um, and while on one level that's true, but what I heard from them I think was really exciting because they both spoke to this as really kind of a generational kind of legacy opportunity that, the current, congregation members in taking on this project, thought about it in this, 50 plus year realm. Kathy talked about, what a gift to a future pastor that he wouldn't have to think about, he or she wouldn't have to think about an HVAC system. And Elizabeth was very explicit about not thinking just in a 20-year time frame, but thinking in that longer time frame. And I think that is a very inspiring um, way to put this to a congregation. And it's been inspiring to us at Mass IPL and Kathy, we came to that event a month or so ago, uh, and that got both me and Michael like really excited about the opportunity for houses of worship to do this. Um, and so I think for everyone here, kind of the first step is a basic step about how old is the equipment that you currently have? How soon is it going to be um, needing to be replaced or upgraded? Um, Typically, systems have about a 20-year life. And we heard, this process can be anywhere from 2 to 3 years to 12 years, right? So if you get a sense that your system is in that maybe 15-year age, it's a good time to start early conversations with your congregation because anywhere you go, it's going to be an expensive project as we've seen. Um, but then, of course, going from fossil fuel to air source heat pump, I was trying to think of a good analogy. Maybe it's like going from an electronic calculator to a computer. You know, there's some things that are similar, but there's some things that are completely different. And you kind of have to educate yourself and wrap your head around what those differences are. And that does take time. Um, there's certainly, you know, Greener U, fantastic resource. I'm going to drop my email in the chat here as well. Um, Here at Mass IPL, one of our key offerings is what we call an environmental stewardship assessment. And one of the things we do there is look at the age of your existing equipment and help you think about when do you need to be thinking about replacing it and go on that. But I'm, happy to have conversations with people about that. And this is an area that we're investing in this year. We have a summer intern who's going to be putting together a lot of information that we'll be posting on our website, probably have some future webinars of our own. Kathy will be reaching out to you. We want to do our own sort of version of a case study on the great work at Wellesley. Um, and we're also speaking with the folks at HEAT, which is an organization here in Massachusetts that is looking beyond the single building geothermal system, looking at evolving the entire gas network infrastructure to a networked thermal energy world, which takes us in a whole other direction too, but tremendous opportunity for that. So again, I want to thank everybody for coming to listen to this. There's clearly a lot of interest and a lot of momentum around this idea of making a radical change like this, which benefits both our organizations with the comfort and the longevity of these systems we've heard about, but obviously part of our call as people of faith to care for God's creation and address the climate emergency. So keep plugging away, stay in touch with all of us. And I saw somebody from Ohio. There is an IPL in Ohio. Reach out to your IPL folks for their help as well. That's Dell, I think. And you know, I think one of the other themes here was, you know, it may seem daunting, but roll up your sleeves, dig into it, and you can figure it out.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, certainly the journey is much more attainable and much more enjoyable when we do this together. And we need the gifts and the diversity of one another to help us get there. So, again, thank you for being with us tonight. This presentation will be available. We will be sharing it. And we're very grateful that you took the time to be with us tonight. So keep discerning, keep journeying, keep sharing your gifts with one another. And we look forward to seeing you at a future event and an educational opportunity. So take good care and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thank
all.
you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye bye.